The fluorescent lights in the NICU flickered slightly, almost as if even they were holding their breath. It was just after 4 a.m. at St. Mark's Hospital in Boston, and the usually quiet neonatal unit was anything but calm. Alarms were beeping in chaotic rhythm. Nurses moved swiftly, with tension in every step. At the far end of the unit, inside Incubator 7, a life was hanging by a thread, and that thread was thinner than ever. The baby had been born at just 23 weeks, weighing only 500 grams, barely more than a can of soda. His skin was nearly translucent, his limbs fragile like glass. No one expected him to survive the night, except for Dr. Evan Hartman. Tall, in his mid-40s, with graying hair that betrayed the long years he'd sacrificed for medicine, Dr. Hartman stood motionless beside the incubator, eyes locked on the tiniest human he'd ever had to fight for. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't breathing. He was waiting, listening, watching for something the monitors couldn't measure. "He's coding," a nurse shouted. "O2 sat plummeting. 58%. No response to CPAP. Bag him," someone called. But Dr. Hartman raised one hand, calmly, authoritatively. "No, not yet." The room froze. Time seemed to stretch. A second felt like a minute. The NICU team looked at him, puzzled, almost desperate. "I've seen this before," he whispered. "Give him one more chance. Let him fight. On his own." No one moved for 2 full seconds. A lifetime when dealing with a micro-preemie. Then suddenly the baby's chest, which had been motionless, gave the tiniest, most miraculous twitch. One breath, then another. Weak, fragile, but real. The monitor beeped softly. Then again, a pulse. Gasps filled the room. One of the nurses covered her mouth. Another began to cry. He's breathing," she said, almost not believing it. Dr. Hartman didn't smile. Not yet. He gently reached into the incubator, placing one finger, just one, next to the baby's curled, almost invisible hand. Miraculously, impossibly, the baby gripped it. It was like watching a whisper touch a storm. "He's here," Dr. Hartman murmured. "And he's not done yet." That moment, frozen in time, would later be called a miracle by many. But for Dr. Hartman, it wasn't just science. It wasn't luck. It was something else entirely, something no textbook had ever taught him. But what no one in that room knew yet was that this wasn't just another patient for him, not just another fragile life in a sea of tiny incubators. There was a secret buried in Dr. Hartman's past, a reason why he refused to give up on this child, a wound that hadn't healed, a baby he had once lost, and now, standing in that NICU, he had been given a second chance. If this story already moved you, hit that subscribe button. This channel shares real stories that touch the heart and deserve to be remembered. Turn on notifications so you never miss a single one. 15 years earlier, the walls of the same St. Mark's Hospital hadn't changed much. Same white paint, same humming fluorescent lights. But back then, Dr. Evan Hartman wasn't Dr. Hartman yet. He was a resident, young, idealistic, and madly in love with someone who also wore scrubs. Her name was Claire. She was a NICU nurse, warm-eyed and full of laughter. The kind of woman who talked to premature babies like they could understand her. And maybe somehow they did. She believed every baby had a story, a soul, even if it was only the size of her palm. And Evan? He believed in her. They weren't just partners in the hospital. They were building a life. And when Claire whispered one night that she was pregnant, Evan had dropped his coffee, right there in the break room. It was the happiest mess he'd ever made. But life, as they both knew from their time in medicine, doesn't always follow the script. At 24 weeks, Claire went into early labor. There was nothing they could do to stop it. No time for transfers. No time to prepare. Evan remembered the panic in her eyes as they wheeled her into the delivery room. He remembered holding her hand as she screamed. And he remembered, with agonizing clarity, the silence that followed the birth. No cry, no movement, just silence. Their baby girl, Emery, weighed 510 grams. She lived for just under an hour. Evan never forgave himself. He was a doctor. He should have done more, should have known more, should have saved her. But instead, he stood there frozen, watching Claire's heart break in real time. She never recovered from it. Neither did he. Within a year, Claire left the hospital, left the city, left him. She said it hurt too much to stay, to be around tiny babies and what-ifs. Evan stayed. He buried himself in work, in studies, in every case he could take. But from that day on, every time he stepped into the NICU, he saw ghosts, heard silence where there should be heartbeats. And still, he came back, every day. Because deep down, he knew maybe one day, one child might give him a reason to believe again. Fast forward to the present. That reason was now lying in Incubator 7. The fragile boy had been born to a 19-year-old girl named Jasmine, who had shown up at the ER alone, in pain, and too scared to speak. No prenatal care, no family, no warning, just blood, panic, and fear. She gave birth in under 12 minutes. The doctors hadn't even known she was carrying twins. The first had been stillborn. The second was barely alive. Jasmine had asked only one thing before collapsing from exhaustion. Please, save him. Please. And that's when Dr. Hartman had stepped in, not just as a physician, but as a man who had once stood helplessly in the same position as her, praying for a miracle. Now, the circle had closed. He didn't know Jasmine's full story. She hadn't woken up yet, but he knew the boy's name, Emery. It was written on the ID tag around his tiny ankle, a name Jasmine had picked without knowing anything about Dr. Hartman's past. The same name as the daughter he lost. That couldn't be a coincidence. This was something else. 3 days had passed since baby Emery's miraculous breath in Incubator 7. 3 days of tubes, machines, whispered prayers, and sleepless watches. His condition was still critical. One infection could end everything. One moment without oxygen. One mistake. But he was holding on. So was Dr. Hartman. He hadn't left the NICU. Not really. Nurses found him sleeping in the chair beside the incubator. He logged in every shift himself, personally monitoring labs and vitals, something no attending usually did. Everyone noticed. "Doc," one of the senior nurses whispered, "You sure you're okay?" He gave a half smile. "You ever feel like the universe just handed you a second chance?" She didn't know what he meant. Not yet. Meanwhile, across the hospital, Jasmine had finally woken up, pale, disoriented, scared. She kept asking for the baby. A social worker was there. A nurse held her hand. But Jasmine wouldn't look anyone in the eye, not until Dr. Hartman walked into the room. She froze. He stood in the doorway, unsure. "I'm Dr. Hartman. I've been caring for your baby boy." "You're him," she whispered. He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You were there," she said. "In my dream. Before I woke up, you were holding him." Something about her voice chilled him, not with fear, but with familiarity. Jasmine looked barely old enough to be out of high school. She had deep-set eyes, freckles on her cheeks, and a nervous way of twisting the hospital blanket in her hands. But when she looked up at Dr. Hartman, something shifted. A question formed in her voice. "Did you know my mom?" "Claire?" The air left the room. His heart stopped. "Claire." Dr. Hartman sat down slowly. "Claire was my wife." Jasmine's eyes brimmed with tears. "She was my mom," she said. "She died when I was 11. Cancer. I went into the system after that. I never knew my father." Mom wouldn't talk about him. The room began spinning. Dr. Hartman could barely find words. He looked at her, really looked, and it hit him like a wave. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile. He hadn't noticed before. She wasn't just a patient. She was his daughter. And baby Emery was his grandson. He stepped out of the room like a man in a dream, gripping the railing in the hallway, trying not to collapse. 15 years. He thought she had left with nothing, but she had carried a piece of him, a piece of them, and raised her the best she could. Now Jasmine was here, unknowingly bringing that lost piece back to him in the form of a 500-gram baby, clinging to life. And suddenly, everything made sense. Why he had felt drawn to the child. Why he hadn't given up when others did. Why the name Emery pierced his heart like a lightning bolt. But there was still one devastating truth left unspoken. He hadn't been there. For Jasmine. For Claire. For any of it. And now, the universe was asking him one thing. Will you show up now? Dr. Evan Hartman stood in the NICU that night, but it felt different. The machines still hummed, the monitors still blinked, but the air was heavier, like the weight of truth had settled into the walls. He stared at the incubator, watching his grandson, Emery, fight for every breath. His skin was slightly pinker today, oxygen saturation stable, but they weren't out of danger. Not by far. Jasmine was recovering, quiet, processing everything. She hadn't said much since revealing that Claire, the love of Evan's life, had raised her, that she had died years ago, that Jasmine had gone through the foster system alone, that she'd been terrified during the pregnancy. unsure if she could love a child she never asked for. But now, she was looking at Emery like he was the center of her world. Still, she kept her distance from Dr. Hartman. Until that night. She walked into the NICU, not as a patient, but as a mother, and she stood beside him for the first time. "I didn't come here looking for a father," she said softly. He nodded. "And I didn't know I had a daughter. That's not something I'm proud of." There was a pause. The machines beeped gently between them. "But," he continued, voice shaking, "I'm here now, and I want to be here. Not as a doctor, as whatever you'll let me be." Jasmine didn't answer with words. She reached into the incubator with a gloved hand and gently stroked the edge of her son's foot. And for the first time, they did it together, side by side, grandfather, daughter, mother, doctor, all roles colliding into something that felt real, something healing. Later that night, when the hospital had quieted and the world outside had gone dark, Dr. Hartman did something no one had ever seen him do in his 2 decades at St. Mark's. He cried. Not the silent, composed tears of a tired doctor, but the deep, broken sobs of a man who had been holding pain for too long. He cried for the daughter he never knew, for the love he lost, and for the fragile boy who had somehow brought all of it back together. Now it's your turn. What would you do if you discovered a child you were saving was family you never knew you had? Would you take the risk? Open your heart again? Leave a comment below. We want to hear your story. Your voice matters here. 2 months later, the NICU team gathered around Incubator 7 for the last time. Emery, once barely the size of a hand, was now strong enough to breathe on his own. His weight had more than doubled. His tiny fists now waved through the air with surprising strength. His eyes, big, dark, and curious, followed every sound like he was already trying to understand the world he fought so hard to enter. He was going home. Jasmine stood at his side, glowing with a quiet kind of pride. Stronger. Still young, still uncertain about what the future held, but no longer afraid. And beside her was Dr. Evan Hartman, no longer just the attending physician. Now, officially, and proudly, her father. They hadn't rushed into labels. There were too many wounds, too much time lost, but over long coffee conversations in the hospital cafeteria, long walks down memory lanes, and quiet moments beside Emery's incubator, something had been rebuilt. Slowly, gently, like Emery himself. That day, as Jasmine cradled her son, now fitted in his first ever newborn-size onesie, Evan took a deep breath and handed her something. A small, weathered photo of Claire in her scrubs, smiling beside a younger Evan. "She always knew how to fight for the little ones," he whispered. "I think she sent him here to remind me." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. She pressed the photo against her chest, then looked down at her son. "You saved him," she said. Evan shook his head. "No," he replied softly. "He saved me." As they left the NICU, nurses lined the hallway, applauding, smiling, some with tears in their eyes. Baby Emery, bundled tightly in a blue blanket, his name stitched on the side, blinked at the bright lights, unfazed. It wasn't just a hospital discharge. It was the start of a new chapter. 3 generations, one gone, one found, one just beginning, walking forward together. Not perfect, but whole. If you've ever lost someone, or found love in the most unexpected way, this story is for you. Life is fragile, but sometimes it takes half a kilo of hope to remind us how powerful it really is. If this story touched your heart, you need to watch the next one. A woman in a coma hears everything, and the nurse who talks to her discovers a secret no one saw coming. Click here and come cry with us again. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who still believes in miracles.